Yeah. Coming to you from the far eastern reaches of the RASL footprint. It is episode 2 of the Trophy Grace Project. Minneapolis Mercenaries host, league commissioner, not relevant in the last 7 years, and your host, Stormzy, joined by, I'm looking here at the notes, Ryan Hatteberg. Is that right? GM Maple Grove Makos. Ryan,
Yo,
I gotta tell you, it's interesting. You know, we had an earlier podcast. I think it went really great. It's weird. It seems like it's almost like just old hats. Like we're just kind of picking up right where we left it off. You know,
total another
strange.
day, another time.
I know. Oh
Very
gosh,
distinct. Very distinct.
really put in a interesting day today. It's a lot different than any time I've had before. So
Glad to be back.
glad to be back. Well, I think the big thing here, takeaways from our friend here, our GM Maple Grove Makos, as we talked about before. Big things to remember: two-time GM of the year, one-time Trophy Grace champion, the purveyor of the got it, don't got it draft method, man who has a belief that the only bad movie ever made is About Schmidt. Can you elaborate on that for us a little bit, Ryan?
Yeah, I can. It's a terrible movie. Next
Why is
question.
it why is it the only bad movie?
I don't know. I think that the real answer is probably that it was the first time that I realized I needed to manage my expectations properly
Hmm,
going into a movie.
sure.
I didn't know that before that movie. I certainly did not envision going into a depressing movie about a widower who seemingly was going to kill himself um, with no audio, no dialogue. It's just 90 minutes of no talking, and then you get to see Kathy Bates naked. I can't think of a worse formula for a
That
movie.
that part that part I forget about. The only thing I remember is I like the initial interpretation of it. It's just movies are supposed to entertain. It's the only movie that's never entertained me. I have such a low standard for entertainment, and this did not make it. Also, Kathy Bates is naked. It was like you had me at Kathy Bates is naked. And I
Yeah.
have seen you
Ugh.
entertained by very, very little, so that does not say much about that film at all,
No,
at all. So I guess what you'd say is that about Schmidt don't got it,
I don't got
but
it.
cat,
No,
but Kathy Bates got it. TBD. I guess we're gonna all have to check it out for ourselves.
I plead
Uh,
the fifth. FIF.
well, as far as pleading the fifth, in terms of hot takes, in terms of things that don't ever get tired of hearing of, do you ever get tired of proving Carp, Dave, Kyle, and Penton wrong in a RASL sense?
You would think so, given the amount of times that I have pulled that off.
Mhm.
But I can uh, emphatically tell you that each time I put them in their place, it's like the first time all over again. It brings me just utter joy to
I mean,
dance
the
on their
ult
graves.
the ultimate for that had to be the LeBron moment, having the owners summit at your house.
Oh my god!
I mean, the only thing that could have made that better is if you would have gone that route and had like a cake, had the Steph, the KD, or the Steph, the Draymond and Clay cake.
Yeah, I without rehashing that entire thing, just
Right.
for our wide listening audience,
Oh yeah, for all of those outside of the 10 people in this league, that out of the 10, we're probably getting 3 listening to this. But yeah, totally hit them.
you guys were going to try and kick me out of the league for my off-season moves. I don't know if it was collusion, gross incompetence, negligence, malfeasance. I don't know what the legal term was, but people were up in arms with my moves and how dumb I was about the trades I was making, that they wanted me kicked out of the league.
And then what happened?
Oh, I don't know, a little thing called Trophy Grace.
Oh yeah, that
The
happened.
chip, the chip,
Yeah.
the chip happened. I'm the champ.
How dumb would you say you were? Did you say you're dumb like a fox?
Oh, thereabouts.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
yes,
I
to
gotta
answer your question, having them step on Maple Grove soil and eat Chick-fil-A sandwiches and have to wallow in my cromulence for an entire night, it doesn't get any better than that.
it was next level cromulent as far as the level of pomp and circumstance to it. I did like the fact. I mean, that whole situation was great, if only because, like you said, how much disdain you got early on. The fact that you, I think, beat 3 out of the 4 of them on your way to the title, and then capped it off with that ultimate troll move. Uh, that cements your legacy in RASL. You could finish last every year from here on out, um, and that's one of the biggest flexes I think that could ever happen. The other side of that coin, then, is that why you tempted fate with the Watson and Henry trade? Did you
We're
just,
doing
or were you feeling untouchable to the fact, or you thought, look, I'm going to take the trade that could burn everyone and make them come at me so hard that I'm going to push it to like the ultimate limit. Just being someone that always is pushing the boundaries, like very much a Prince type, as far as playing with boundaries and
nice little Prince move there. Well, how much time do you have?
I mean, I got all day.
All right. Well,
I mean, it's a new day. It's not like we're, we're
no.
going back to back.
We got
You
eight
got
to
a
five today.
you got that different pickle shirt on. I got my other Wisconsin hat on.
Yeah. Um, well, I think to answer that, we got to take a couple steps backwards to go forwards here. And at a very high level, the 30,000 foot view,
mm,
I kind of break down my RASL career into 3 phases. The first one, which was more or less a drunken haze
yeah,
of trades and exploring what it meant to be in a dynasty league, marred by a really, really poor initial draft in which I sunk most of my auction dollars into Lawrence Boney Maroney.
yeah.
That's got to be an all-time flop. And I never
Oh
really
boy.
recovered. So I marked the transition from phase 1 to phase 2 when I went all in with Cam Newton, with GM Cobian.
Hmm.
And that marked a desire to concentrate into a few really high profile players, leverage all my draft picks for proven commodities. So that usually did turn out to be some sort of distressed asset, but
Hmm.
somebody who didn't need to prove anything. You take out the variability of the draft and all the different moving parts there. This person's in the league. They're not a superstar, so you're limiting your ceiling. But filling in through waiver wire ads, concentrating on big trades, um, and that worked. That got me to the chip, and I tried to start parlaying that phase 2 into a phase 3 built around Deshaun Watson. That
Hmm.
was the initial plan,
Right.
because I was as high as anybody could possibly be on Deshaun Watson, and it certainly looked like that was going to pay off, and very likely still could.
Sure.
The problem was I had kind of fool's gold. I looked at the timing of some of the other GMs, and some of the GMs and teams right now were going to be very good, and it seemed unlikely that I was going to be able to consistently and reliably beat them, where you could really, assume that you were going to contend for a title. And if that wasn't the case, then what could you do differently?
Yeah.
And without going even more long-winded or ranting about Deshaun Watson, as much as I love him, it looked like, and then 2020 happened, and it looked like I was probably very, very wrong. But now that it's coming back down to earth, the Texans are a really poorly run franchise, and I thought that was largely driven by Bill O'Brien. I did not know that he was going to get fired. I figured as GM and coach, he for sure was going to last the season, maybe even
Mm.
multiple seasons. And the way he schemed, the way he traded away very significant assets,
Yeah.
it just smacked of incompetence. And I'm like, they're going to get him killed, one, with poor scheme and the amount of hits that he was taking.
Yeah.
So very real longevity concerns there. Two, they're never going to put him in a situation to succeed. So his career is going to get squandered. So if I'm going to try and pivot to phase 3, which I won't show you entirely behind the curtain on phase 3, but if I'm going to pivot there, I don't think I can rely on Watson as that cornerstone. So the trade was I don't even remember all the parts of it, but it was Watson and Henry, Tractor Cito and D Watt, and Deshaun Watson was the one that hurt because I had emotionally bought in on him.
Mm.
I had paid such a big price to land him, and I was genuinely concerned that he was never going to happen, and I needed to get out from underneath him before he lost all of his value. So I did that. Then Bill O'Brien gets fired. All of a sudden, they start clicking, even without DeAndre Hopkins. He ends up being the number 5 quarterback, or I think by some measures, he was number 1 this year. Certainly on some of the efficiency ratings and targeting the end zone and things like that. And it just looked terrible. He signed a 10-year contract, and it's like, oh my God, what did I do? Some of the picks didn't play out. Pausing on D-Watt there for a second. Tractor Cito, also very, very big fan of him, but he certainly just did not have, and I think most people are wise to the punishment that a running back like that takes. So I think they are going to lose their value fast. But the long-winded answer is I was pivoting to phase 3. I needed to rebuild. Those were the 2 last key pieces that I had. I wasn't going to contend right now anyway. It was just a matter of, did I get fair value? Definitely not. But I got the players that I wanted in Deebo Samuel, and then the picks that I needed to land what I thought was a pretty impressive draft. Yeah. That I wanted to have some swings in the first part of it. So,
I mean, there's some threads in there that almost, when you put them together, they almost make sense. Like if you cobbled them together, you could say like a sane person wrote this. Because on its face, if you're like, well, what did you value D-Watt at? Well, I value D-Watt at 1 first-round pick, which seems very low. But okay, well then what did you value Derrick Henry at? A second-round pick in Deebo Samuel. Deebo Hamilton would be considerably worse, but I'll give you credit for going for Deebo Samuel instead of his cousin. I mean, okay, you defended yourself. Like I said, there's some threads there. Ultimately, I mean, I'm still not going to take it, but I feel like you gave us some background to at least know that there was moments of clarity within that. I'd love to play the clip right now of when I announced that trade to the draft, because I know you have it. I'll play it here. Everybody can see it. But yeah, it went over well. So
okay. I will just say this. You guys thought I was crazy when I said Michael Thomas was a bad character guy. And that may or may not have played a role in him becoming the number 1 receiver.
I don't think anyone thought you were crazy for saying he was a bad character guy. I just think maybe people thought you were crazy for saying he's a bad character guy, and that's why you traded him plus 2 second-round picks away for Kenny Golladay.
Sweet Kenny G.
I think you're getting caught up on the wrong part of that.
Well, I'll tell you what. I determined that the Houston Texan organization was the fatal flaw in Deshaun Watson. And if they refuse to trade him and he
Yeah,
refuses to play,
yeah,
it will get resolved eventually, one way or the other. But,
sure, sure.
is Joel going to miss out on an entire season of what should have been a top tier quarterback one in that trade? Sure looks like that.
I mean, I think, hey, yeah. If he misses a whole season, maybe that really plays into your. I think best case scenario for you, and I think we've talked about this before. The best case scenario for you to not have that trade hurt as much is for him to stay in Houston, where
Yeah.
it feels like. I mean, I think they showed it by realizing that JJ Watt got what like $17 million a season, and they easily could have gotten like a third round pick for him,
For
and
sure.
decided to just cut him. Whatever. I mean, it's an organization that has a former team chaplain now as their president. So, and he just hired a character coach for the team that was his co-producer on a Bible documentary. So, you know, football guys, it's all making sense. How can you argue with that type of strategy and that type of foresight?
I don't know. You
I
can't.
You can't. It's championship or bust. I think that's where we're heading. So,
Yep.
well, let's check out what news we've had since our last episode. I have slightly less water to drink than the last time we checked the news wire. Not much has happened in the last hour since we last recorded.
I have slightly less Mountain Dew.
Uh, yeah, but no, nothing new has happened, which is shocking considering how long we are since our previous recording. Um,
It is.
but that's going to set us up for the rest of this episode. I noticed off the top, I did not mention at all what we were talking about today. You got to bear with me here. This is, just learning. This is just watching someone learn and get better and grow. Uh, so getting better at things like telling everyone what to expect. We're going to be talking about the 2020 RASL awards today. We're going to be this is the first look at the winners. We're going to talk about all the finalists. Give you some breakdowns on their cases, talk about the winners based on the voting, how we feel about that. Really going to dive into executive of the year, tear apart each one individually, be very vicious, and see who's left
Ruthless.
standing at the end of it. So ruthless.
Mm.
That's what we're going to start out with. Anything off the top, Ryan, that you want to point out before we get into the awards?
Uh, Not particularly. I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention once
Hmm.
that the GM of St. Louis is garbage.
Now, based
And
on the board that you have behind you, I'm guessing you are pretty strongly in the camp that GM Fisher for St. Louis Park is in the running for Executive of the Year.
I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about, but I don't think that this might be a spoiler alert, but I don't think that GM Fisher is ever going to be in consideration for GM of the year. So, yeah, and again, I don't want to put the cart ahead of the horse here, but trading what will probably now be the dynasty wide receiver one for a sack of potatoes is
I mean, and Will Fuller and Billy Foles.
so Billy Fuller can only stay healthy if he takes steroids.
Yeah, right.
And I don't think they're going to let him take steroids again. So,
So you're telling me that Fully Bill probably isn't somebody to stake your claim to?
You sure could, but that doing so wouldn't put you in the conversation for GM of the year.
Yeah, Billy Foley.
Billy Foley. With a name like that, how could you go wrong?
I do want to bring one thing up. You mentioned that Lawrence Maroney in the initial auction
Boney
was your
Maroney?
highest. Yeah, Boney Maroney. Yeah, he was. So in our $200 amount, do you know how much you spent on Boney Maroney?
Sadly, it's probably leaving me at this point, but I want to say that it was low end $62, high end $72.
So he was the fourth highest purchased player in the initial auction. He was $56.
Oh,
So he was behind Steven Jackson at 76, LaDainian Tomlinson at 71, and Reggie Bush at 64. And then Boney Maroney. Um, Boney definitely was probably he and Larry Johnson probably were the highest, the most expensive misses amongst the group. Digital error there. We're back and rolling. So what we're going to do, try to pick momentum back up and head right into the 2020 RASL Awards. We're going to start out with the least important, least exciting. What's the point of really even talking about it? Uh, Maybe we'll drop it from here on out because honestly, who cares? It's the comeback player of the year. Finalists for this award, there are only two. Rob Gronkowski, tight end for the Whitaker Wendigo. Whitaker, as you remember, kept Gronkowski on the roster throughout all of 2019. His retired season paid off in spades when he signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Whitaker ends up with Gronkowski getting um, a relatively decent player out of the mix. Did get a position at a position that's really difficult for the season. Tight end. Um, Gronkowski did show up there, uh, having an okay go of it, but he ultimately ends up losing out the award to the 2020 Comeback Player of the Year for RASL in Cam Newton, quarterback for the Minneapolis Mercenaries. Um, Ryan, very briefly, I mean, I know you don't care, neither do I, but what do you think about Cam taking the award?
Uh, this is a real stink fest. But of the two candidates, yeah, Cam was deserving of the award. I think both of them um, were pretty unremarkable throughout the year.
Right.
Um, but at least with Cam, there was probably a couple weeks where you got to win by playing him.
Right.
Versus that may have happened with Gronkowski, but it's tough to really say. Um,
Yeah,
I think his
you weren't
relative performance at tight end was better, but
right.
Cam outproduced.
Cam did finish as QB 20 during the regular season. So not great, but to your point, he did put up a 64 point week 2, a 42 point week 1, and then had 3 other weeks over 35 before ending, obviously, with a 66 point in the Pro Bowl week. Nothing major, but considering some of the other candidates, obviously winning a couple of weeks with Cam, um, wins out over Gronkowski, who, like you mentioned, had an okay season, finishing as tight end 7 for the season. So not bad. Of course, the difference between tight end 3 and tight end 15 was minimal. Really only two viable tight ends to be playing. But Gronk did provide Dan Boy with a nice supplement to Darren Waller at tight end too. So again, I don't want to spend too much time on that because who really cares? I think the only thing we should be voting on next year for comeback player of the year is if it even should exist anymore.
Agreed. Gross.
It's gross. So, an interesting caveat here to the awards 2020 Arousal Coach of the Year. Now, this goes to, this is strictly based on your MER, highest MER for the
Merman.
Merman. And the Merman of all Mermen was, and this is going to be tough for you to hear, John Carp Fisher, St. Louis Park Centaurs. John had a 91.4% median MER. That is the highest of the last 4 years. So not only highest in 2020, but highest of the last 4 years, besting John Penton, Coach John Penton's 90.7 median MER in 2018. Carp actually bested the league median MER of 81.9, so he bested that by almost 10 percentage points. And this is the highest median MER for Carp since 2017, when he had an 86.3%. So, a season of struggles that we all heard about from start to finish. No shortage of being reminded how difficult everything was for St. Louis Park. But, you know, a bright spot, a feather in his cap is that he's coach of the year. So at least he put the best team out there every week to get beat by somebody. Um, and we'll see, maybe coach of the year that won't factor into executive of the year, but who knows? Maybe Carp can piece those two together. What positives do you have to say about the 2020 coach of the year?
Well, I got a hot take here.
Oh,
Uh,
I'd love to hear it.
real hot take here. And I would argue it is certainly possible for somebody to win Coach of the Year based on a MER rating because they are correctly picking the right players from a treasure trove of talent on their bench.
Mm-hmm.
And just, as sort of a prognosticator, a soothsayer, making all the right moves. But the more likely answer is that your team is dog shit and you only have a couple obvious players that you need to play. And I think you need to look no further than the past recipients of the award. And I think I was actually one of them in some of my darker years. But
Mm-hmm.
Penton, Carp, they're going to be winning this award because their teams are terrible. They will not be winning the GM of the year.
You were the 2017 recipients, and Roseville was the 2018 recipient before Whitaker took it in 2019. So, yes, there is a way to game the system. That is to have a very terrible bench, and have a top heavy roster. That's certainly a way to game the system. Stack up those Coach of the Year awards. I'm not going to go so far as to say that's what St. Louis Park did. It sounds like you're very blatantly calling them out for that, which is shocking. It's shocking. I wouldn't have expected you to
That
so low.
no, that I don't get involved in petty matters.
You
Everything's
don't.
on the up and up when I weigh in.
Certainly, you're a man of distinguished disagreements. Certainly not a petty man by any means. I think
I
I
am
think
the
you.
MVPS,
Yeah.
most valuable pot stirrer.
I would like you to guess, though, talking briefly about the Coach of the Year, I would like you to guess who do you think was 10th for Coach of the Year out of the 10 franchises?
I would think.
There's only
I
10 franchises. I don't know that it has to take this long, but
No, it doesn't. I'm tempted to say our champ, just because he had such ridiculous depth at a position he couldn't play.
that's
So
true. And you are
that seems
close.
like the
You are
most
close. Hopkins did slot at ninth. But this
okay.
is a definite gotcha question. This is me flexing that journalism know-how that I'm picking up here after 4 or 5 episodes of podcast now. You were 10th, so this is a gotcha moment.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
too
yeah,
much depth.
exactly. Maple Grove came in at 10th with a median MER of 77.1, so just a little bit off of the 91.4 that Carp won with. Hopkins comes in second, just beating him out at 78.3. Then you had Washington County, Lake Elmo, Whitaker, Minneapolis, all within 79 to 81%. Um, a little bump up to Stillwater at 82. He finishes fourth. Coach Penton there at fourth. Dubiner at third at 86.4. And then Geneva made a little bit of a push at 89.1, but still well off the pace for Carp at 91.4. So kudos to Carp. Playing for 2020, not making the playoffs, but a feather in the cap, like we said. So he's got to feel good about that. And three cheers for Carp.
Yes, 3 cheers.
So let's move on to Breakout Player. This is a little bit of an interesting conversation to have. The finalists were, speaking of which, for Carp in the St. Louis Park Centaur, late season addition Billy Foley, as we call him here, otherwise known as Will Fuller the Fifth, wide receiver, St. Louis Park Centaurs, formerly of the Roseville Riptide. David Montgomery, running back now of the Washington County Warriors, formerly of the Whitaker Wendigo, and DK Metcalf, wide receiver for the Geneva Gigolos. So, kind of just top line here, Ryan, for you. What do you think for these three players as far as their 2020 season is concerned? Kind of top line, real brief. How would you break down their seasons?
Yeah. Well, I think we can start with the low hanging fruit, which is that Billy Foley is a dirty cheater,
Mhm.
currently employed by a very low integrity, low character, chronically underperforming RASL franchise.
Correct.
And he really hasn't been able to stay healthy at all. I mentioned that either earlier today or on the other day when we had the podcast, that he's always injured.
Which was so long ago, it's hard to
It
remember.
was just so long ago. It certainly seems like he relied to steroids to keep himself healthy, and he's not going to get that opportunity again. But
Right.
He did all right, but it's all tainted now.
Yeah, and to your point, on average, he did finish the season. Granted, he didn't play numerous games for the suspension. He did finish the season as wide receiver 6 on average. As far as overall points, wide receiver 29, he did average 28.6 points per game, playing in 11 games.
The other two are probably significantly more interesting.
Agreed. I think it is a two-man race for sure.
And why don't we start with Montgomery?
Let's do it. Let's start.
He was traded in the RASL. And, I think he's kind of a controversial running back, not just in the RASL, but across the board. I think there's a community of David Montgomery truthers out there that believe he is something exceptional, that just hasn't had either the opportunity or the situation to prove it just yet. And the second half of the season, he certainly did some serious damage.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to play devil's advocate, you could say his strength of schedule at rushing defense in that second half of the season was about as ideal as it gets.
Right.
So did he really kind of turn the corner performance-wise and break out? Is this something we can expect to see at this level and above, gradually getting better? I'm not so sure it is. He broke out. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
And it was a good performance, and it seems like he'll be in a position to do well. But I'll defer to you on any other thoughts on that.
I think the only thing I'd say is a David Montgomery truther has maybe a few more, a few more marbles in the bin than a Pizzagate believer. I just let's be honest.
I don't get your political references. So,
I love that that's a political reference too. Like somehow
well,
that's a
it might
political
not be.
reference. Well, I don't. Yeah, I don't know how it is. Also, this is a total different tangent, but one thing that really bothers me is this idea that you just add gate to everything to say that it's a controversy. And people don't understand that gate has nothing to do with that. Gate is just comes from Watergate. The reason it was called the Watergate scandal is because that was the name of the hotel. It wasn't about water and then gate means scandal. So you put gate on the end of everything and then it becomes a scandal. Like, I, whatever. It drives me insane. We're just like, put gate on it. Gate. Everything's gate. That means it's a scandal. It's like, you fucking morons. Read a fucking book. Sorry. It's
Nerds.
late. It's
Oh
late.
wait,
It's
no,
late.
that's not what
It's
you said.
late. The opposite of nerds. I would like them to be a little more nerdish and actually, figure something out. But um,
Uh,
Montgomery, to your point, Montgomery did finish the season. Inexplicably, he finished overall as running back four. During the regular season, finished as running back 11. So that tells you exactly what happened in weeks 14, 15, or weeks 15, yeah, 14, 15, 16, and 17, how much he crushed. To that end, 46, 37, 57, 53, 41, 47 from weeks 12 on. So obviously that jumped him up the ladder quite a bit. The other big thing for Montgomery is he played 15 games. He only missed one game. So that made a big difference for him. On average, if you take him on average during the regular season, he was running back 22. Now, overall average, taking the whole season, he jumps up to 8. So, yeah, I think he obviously showed a lot more. But if you're looking at the early season, he had a 27, two 27s and a 26-point game, around a 38. He had 4 games under 20 before the bye in week 10. So, uh, really all over the board, not very consistent until the end of the season. I think we'll talk about this later, but obviously Washington County, as far as when they made that trade, it could not have been better for GM Jenkins as far as when he timed that. It's insane, but um, yeah, it's good to see him turn out. Jim Cobian for Whitaker took him, I think, fourth or fifth a couple of years ago in the draft, and hasn't really panned out. Obviously he was able to turn him into D Hop, which is great. Um, but yeah, I'm still lukewarm on Montgomery, and there'll be no surprise then that I think that the next finalist really truly should be the winner of the award. But why don't you give me a little insight into DK for you as far as the season was concerned?
yeah, no, I think the the Seahawks were a tale of two seasons. Um, and in that first part of the season with Russ cooking, um,
You have 1,000
that
monkeys working on 1,000 typewriters
it
to
was
write the
the
story
best of
about DK.
times. It was the blurst of times.
There's you infernal monkeys.
You know, I was going to mention this earlier, but like he was getting compared to Jerry Rice.
Yeah,
Like he had the speed, the route running, the hands, and I think last year wasn't the knock on him that he could only run in a straight line.
yeah.
He's
He's
very
he's one of those guys that's only fast when he runs straight, Ryan.
yeah okay. Well, he put it together. Russ was cooking. They were balanced on offense, and I think you made the comment he would have been the number one
Yeah.
dynasty receiver
Hmm.
on the board there. It didn't stay that way, but certainly if you take a step back and you look at it, you say, okay, what does the breakout mean?
Hmm.
How are we going to define that? And you want to say it's this player that's making this elite jump to an elite level.
Right.
I don't think you can look at. I mean, it was him, and he earned it.
Yeah, and to your point, DK is who ended up winning the votes for Breakout Player of the Year. I think it's an interesting dichotomy between the two. With Montgomery, it's, are you voting for the player that ended the season stronger, but was a total ghost in the first half, or are you taking the player that started out hot and cool? to that point, and to show. And I think it's viable either way. I personally thought that it was DK because he was in the conversation for literally being the dynasty wide receiver one. I think it's shortchanged if you're not talking about him in the top five, even with the way the season ended, just because of what he showed and once he actually was getting the targets. I mean, looking at last year when he finished, I think wide receiver 16, 18, somewhere around there, he's doing that on a very low target share. The first part of the season, up until their bye in week 6, um, failed to score. He scored 30 plus every single week, topping out at 36. Now, in the back half of the season, he did have 3 games under 10 points, but also had a 50-point game in there as well. So, and that's again where we talked about last episode, where things started really cool as far as the offense was concerned. But I do think it's DK. DK does finish as regular season average was wide receiver 3 for DK Metcalf. Now, when you factor in the overall for the full season, slots him down to wide receiver 7, but on average wide receiver 3. So a big showing for DK. He does make all RASL team. Ultimately, that's why I think he wins the award over Montgomery, who had a great final to the season. Actually, ends up slotting right about the same in the running back rankings. But for me, it's breakout, and that's the slow build from where DK was last year. It's not just a jump from being an afterthought like Montgomery was to a very good player. It was a slow ascension, and then showing kind of a winning ability in the front half. So that's ultimately what I went with. I couldn't have argued with anyone that took Montgomery. I just think that's maybe a little short-sighted in terms of what I think that award means for me. But again, very close. Metcalf ends up sneaking it out, and that leads us into breakout. So with breakout, a lot of those breakout winners are usually finalists or people in the running for the next award, which is the 2020 Rookie of the Year. Finalists were Jordan Jefferson, now of the St. Louis Park Centaurs, previously of the Roseville Riptide, who selected Jefferson at, I believe, number 13. Or
You have that backwards.
Oh yeah, sorry, that's right. Now on the Roseville Riptide, selected by the St. Louis Park Centaurs.
Yeah.
I believe St. Louis Park, did they take him in the first round? No, he took him at 12, I think. Yeah, number 2 pick of the second round. That would make sense. So before trading him on, James Robinson, undrafted running back for Whitaker Wendigo, and Justin Herbert, quarterback, picked number 6 by Whitaker. How do you have these 3 shaking out? This seems to be a pretty tough, tough award in terms of what you're looking for. But further analysis, I think it probably clears up pretty easy.
Yeah, I've got a clear number 1, and I would entertain arguments for the other 2, but I've got Robinson in third.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's probably a fine running back.
Right.
Certainly, in the world of managing expectations, he outperformed significantly.
Mm-hmm.
You look at some of those pre-draft rankings, and he was like, and a rookie draft, he was like a 5th round or undrafted target. So for him to step in, for them to move on from Leonard Fournette, and then hand him the ball 25 times a game, the efficiency was but he got the volume and he performed, and I think he ended up finishing as like the 6th or 7th running back of the year. So totally unexpected.
Right.
Put up stats, but I don't think anybody's going to look at James Robinson and say that, wow, he's some elite running back. I do think you say that about Jefferson as a receiver.
Yeah, and I think and I don't want to cut you off, but just to talk about that piece about the efficiency, I think we touched on it in a previous episode, where arguably he was actually less efficient with about the same amount of touches as Leonard Fournette was the previous season. But to your point, I think a big reason is the undrafted free agent Dan getting him as a preseason waiver claim. I think that is a big part of you know his value is the fact that you basically signed him for nothing, and then he finished as as running back 6 for the season. Regular season, he's running back 4. He finished second team all RASL for James Robinson, which is crazy. But I don't want to cut you off. You were mentioning Jordan Jefferson.
Yeah, so he was fine. I think statistically in the relative performance, in terms of ranking, I think Jefferson was probably similar. I think he was in that 6 or 7 range also
Mm-hmm.
for wide receiver. But I do think he is an elite talent.
Yeah.
And I can't remember exactly what he put up for numbers. It was something like 1,400 yards with 7 tutties.
Yeah,
I don't really recall. I don't have it written down anywhere, but you certainly don't want to be the GM of record that traded this guy. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But no, Jefferson is elite, and he there again, he wasn't really a primary focus from a scheme standpoint or from a production standpoint in the first couple games.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of a breakout. It was already a situation where you had Thielen, but coming into the season, they didn't know who their wide receiver 2 was. So to finish with 1,400 yards is insane.
7 points and 12 points in his first 2 games for Jefferson. And he
1,400 yards on like 88 or somewhere in the 80s of reception. Yeah. So his average yards per reception, his target distance, it was a bona fide superstar rookie performance. Yeah, and if it wasn't for the number 1 guy,
right,
this guy would have.
Yeah, wide receiver 4 for the regular season, wide receiver 6 overall. It's absolutely crazy, especially when, like you mentioned, when you consider where he came from in the first 2 games and how much he piled that on. He was one of the most consistent wide receivers on the stretch. So I think you and I both agree on the rank order here in terms of the candidates. So that leaves you with Justin Herbert. And why don't you give me a little insight into why he is your rookie of the year?
Herbert. I think, wow. We'll probably get into this a little bit later when we talk about the GM award, but I did not have Herbert pegged as a legit franchise quarterback. I think he was going to do something. He was going to get a chance, and I figured he would be all right. But there wasn't really any comp to point to that kind of matched up with what he did that proved to be really exceptional. So I think it was a little bit unexpected. The story of how he even got thrust into, I assume that they're straight shooting us, and that it was 15 minutes before week 1 that he was told he was going to be the starter. He goes out there
week 2,
and Hunter Henry says in the huddle, "What are you doing here?" Like, to go from that to then throwing for 300 yards a game, high volume, high accuracy, deep throws. He ran the ball effectively. He played with complete composure.
Yeah.
And from a statistical standpoint for the RASL, he put up massive points. Completely unexpected. I think they thought he'd get a sniff at the quarterback job this season eventually, but I think people were thinking second half.
Yeah, and it's interesting about him too, because I think, and I know for people that maybe don't follow it as closely, but year previous in 2019 for the 2019 draft, there was talk that Herbert was going to declare, and if he did, he'd be the number 1 pick. and then he chose to stay in school for 2020, or excuse me, 2018. He chose to stay in school for 2019. And as we've seen with a lot of prospects, that just provides more tape to kind of pick apart. And to be honest, with the 2018 idea, it was some people saying he'd be the number one pick, others saying like I wouldn't use a first rounder on him. But then coming back in 2019, having all that tape, and I saw a lot of Oregon games, and I was not sold on him at all. I did not see this coming. I knew he had a cannon for an arm, but he never used it in college. He was a great athlete, but I didn't think that necessarily was going to mean he's going to be able to, be like a dual threat. Uh, yeah, this completely caught me off guard. And we'll talk about when the GM comes around, but yeah, I was just glad someone else made that pick. And I mean, it's crazy. This is one of the best rookie classes that we've ever had in RASL. Out of the top 50, or excuse me, out of the top 100 all-time rookie seasons as far as average, we had uh, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 of the top 100 rookie seasons as far as average points took place here in 2020. So Herbert, who is the 2020 RASL Rookie of the Year, put up the fifth most points on average of any rookie ever, behind only uh, RG3, Deshaun Watson, Cam Newton, and Saquon Barkley as far as a per game basis. Robinson came in at 23rd, and Justin Jefferson came in at 42nd. Now, as far as wide receiver is concerned, Justin Jefferson put up the second highest points per game ever, only bested by OBJ's absolutely insane 40.6 points per game in 2014 when he also finished as wide receiver 6. So Jefferson, and I mean, he was at 28.6, so 12 points off of that, but that's the second highest ever. And Herbert, like I said, on an average basis, is just a little bit off of RG3 and Deshaun, and just behind Cam Newton, and that's for me 100% why he's Rookie of the Year. Consistency on that, being able to play all the way through, with the fact that he finished as QB7 overall, averaging, like I said, 44 a game. He also only had, he had one terrible game of 10.7 points. Other than that, you're looking at a baseline of 28.4 was his lowest score. And then everything else above 35. So,
the one bust was the Patriots.
Right. That 10.72 was was the Patriots, but then he bounced back the next, and then had 28.4 the next week. So I think people thought, okay, everybody's figured it out. And then he turned around and put up 51, 32, and 59 to close out the season. So, just a phenomenal season. Not even starting from the beginning. That's really, really impressive for him. A case can be made for Jefferson, but honestly, if you're looking at these numbers and you see where they're at, Herbert putting up the fifth most points in history for a rookie, there's just no other vote. So this is about as close to unanimous as it can get. I do think there's a clear break, but just in terms of giving a little shout out to some of the other rookies, obviously Jonathan Joe Burrow on average finishes QB 25, but averaged 35 points per game, so that's 16th all time for rookies. Jonathan Taylor finished 30th overall for rookies all time, 31.7 RB5 for the year, so another great showing there. And then Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Tua, Antonio Gibson all finished within the top 65 all time for rookies. So good showings there. A lot of young players, good churn out this year after a couple rookie classes, I think, that were a little bit disappointing as far as depth was concerned. That was certainly not an issue this year. So big ones coming up here: RASL MVP and RASL Executive of the Year. So MVP, Patrick Mahomes, quarterback Geneva Gigolos. is our first finalist, finishing as QB1 for the season. No surprise there. Not quite as dominant as he had been in years past. Second finalist, Dalvin Cook, running back for the Duvin or Despots. Obviously, consistency here, and we'll talk about what kind of differentiates them. And then Travis Kelce, tight end for the Hopkins Harpooners. So, what order do you have them in, Ryan, as far as MVP voting is concerned?
Yeah, I think it's important to make the distinction here that we're voting on the RASL MVP.
Correct.
And for that reason, I would go in the order that I had him on the list, which is Kelce, Cook, and Mahomes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in real life, I think most people would start, including based off of performance this year, they'd start with Mahomes.
Right.
But when you get into the scarcity of the position and the game-changing nature that it was to have Kelce in an otherwise worthless spot, you were getting that. You were getting top end wide receiver one performance from a position that nobody else other than one GM had anything at all.
Right.
So that was an unfair advantage that gave him the nod. I think you can look at Cook and say he did get banged up there for a game or two in the middle of the season, but he really didn't have any bust games, and he was incredibly dynamic, incredibly high performing. He had a great season, and running backs, it's not to the extent that tight end was, but there's not many 3-down backs that don't bust. Right. So I think, and right or wrong, I think Mahomes is going to kind of get dinged a little bit here, just because he is always, as long as he's healthy, he's always going to be in the conversation. He's at such a high level, that it almost has a dilutive effect on him.
There's probably some kind of just going to be some exhaustion with that, because I think the chances that he continuously finishes as running back one are going to be very, very high. So I do agree. I just think part of the thing too, you have to keep in mind, like you said, this is all based on RASL. This is just based on the RASL values. I think the fact that ultimately for the season overall, the fact that Mahomes ended up sliding to QB3, part of that being the fact that, but he finishes QB2 for average, hurt him a little bit. Allen, Watson, even Kyler Murray were all within, a few points. So he was, Mahomes was better. He averaged 51.7 points per game, which was first at the position by 2 points over Kyler at 49.9. So it's a little bit closer. Typically for QBs, unless the other positions don't have a lot of differing value, the QB has to really stand out quite a bit. And we usually default to that just because of our scoring system. But yeah, I think for me, it's Kelce, and Kelce ends up being the 2020 RASL MVP. And the biggest thing for me, why I voted for him, and I think ultimately why I ended up winning, is because you take at 31 points per game. Kelce's averaging 31.6, is averaging more than running backs 3 and 4 combined on a weekly basis. He's averaging tight end, sorry. Yes. So at 31 and change, that's the highest average that we've ever had at the position for tight ends. So he sets the mark there. And it isn't just that he's the highest ever, it's also that he's so much better than the rest of the field. 5 points better than Darren Waller at number 2, which is a big, big difference on a weekly basis. Scoring and then rolling that through the fact that once you got past Waller, the difference between 3 and 15 was very minimal. But wide receiver 3, Logan Thomas; wide receiver 4, Mark Andrews; combined average less than Kelsey did. So Dave got a advantage, like you mentioned, that basically gave him an entirely extra starter on his roster every single week. I don't think that can be overstated, and that's why Kelsey ends up getting the nod, because it's just an advantage that you can't place, and the fact that Dave ended up winning with that, says a lot. I mean, he scored what ended up being 54 more points for the season. Yeah, and Thomas and Hawkinson was wide receiver, tight end 4 combined, didn't even catch up. If Cook hadn't been injured, he'd probably be more in play. I think he's a very strong candidate, even missing a couple of games. Still finishing as running back 2 overall. He finished as running back 1 on regular season average and just in the regular season overall, averaging 48.6 points per game, which is the 3rd most ever at the position. Yeah, so I know when you take that into account, that's why I actually would have him second over Mahomes, because I think it gets lost on just how impressive of a season Dalvin Cook had. It's the 3rd highest points per game ever at the position. So he ended up for the full season ended up averaging 46.7, which is only behind Christian McCaffrey's 51.7 last year and Chris Johnson's 51.4 in 2009. So very impressive for Cook. If you give him another 45 points on the week that he was injured, or if you gave him another 25 when he went out injured in the game.
Those early
against Carolina, he's out at halftime and still had 34 for the game. We could be looking at a score that's even higher. So I do think Cook is the second best. And like you said, I think part of it's just exhaustion with Mahomes having won it 2 years ago and constantly being up there. But I do think the fact that quarterbacks were a little bit closer to him in terms of score probably minimize that. So like you mentioned, just relative value at the position and how much more dominant Kelsey was is what gives him the nod. Great. Well, why don't you start off? What we're gonna do here for the GM Executive of the Year is we're actually going to talk about the case for each individual GM, go through the pros and cons. So I'm going to have Ryan. I'm going to have you start off. Why don't you bring a GM to the table here? Bring up the pros. We'll talk about that, and then I'll start off with the cons for the resume in terms of likelihood of taking the Executive of the Year here. And again, keeping in mind for those listening, this is all about roster management specific to 2020. So we're not judging this based on a trade that has pieces for draft picks or whether you got enough draft picks. It's only what's helping you for 2020. So that's a key thing. So it's going to be based on who you drafted and how they helped this year for your rookie class, trades you made for this year, players you signed, drops you made, all those types of things, just for 2020.
Yeah, I'll kick it off. I'm going to kind of work. My approach here will be kind of from the bottom up.
Sure.
And so I'll start with my relatively new arch nemesis, GM Penton and the Stillwater Scorpions. And I think the positive that you can say for him was absolutely fleecing poor GM Carp out of Justin Jefferson. That was shocking, and jettisoning what I think is well, I can't even say it's fool's gold anymore, but like Zeke, what's his signature? Something about feeding me.
Yeah, just this.
Just feed me. Yeah, he got a tattoo on his stomach or something. He's been eating too much.
Yeah.
I am out in a big way on Zeke, so that kind of factored in. So, to Penton's credit, he's been a little heavy on running back, and he managed to parlay what I thought was an asset that was artificially inflated in value into an absolutely dominant potential superstar in Jefferson. So that was the positive. He had CMC get hurt, so that makes it tough. And as we already pointed out here, the Clyde Edwards-Helaire draft pick
Mhm.
probably felt good at the time. There certainly was a lot of buzz, but I think that's going to be a misstep in the long run.
Yeah.
And I guess before, so those are kind of the positives. I will point out, I don't remember who was involved with the Boyd trade.
So he traded Brandon Cooks and Mr. Robert Anderson
Bob
to
Anderson,
Boyd.
Bobby. Yeah. So if Boyd were to have had a potential to stay kind of in that slot high volume role with Burrow for the next several years, that could have been good. I think he's a free agent.
He is. He's a free agent.
And I don't think
Restricted,
it's, I don't know what's going to happen there, but I do know that they've got some other options that look very promising. So
yeah.
I think there's enough uncertainty there where I don't think that's going to play out quite as good as it looked initially.
Well, yeah, and especially if we're judging that based on 2020, which is what this is marked to.
Right.
And I know we'll discuss, the ramifications moving forward for everything. I think that's
Was
just
I
part
too
of the
forward
discussion.
looking with my comments?
No, I agree. But I'm just saying, if we're specifically
Yeah.
judging that just on 2020, Boyd really did nothing. And I know that has a lot to do with Burrow getting hurt. But Boyd did nothing. And Robbie Anderson, Brandon Cooks at the end of the season was a top 10 wide receiver. And Robbie Anderson was a top 20. So, that's trading a a top 10 and a top 20 wide receiver for a guy that finished, I think outside the top 30. So, yeah, not great there. As far as the 2020, longer term, probably better. And that's probably a trade that he's making for the long term. I do agree.
Yeah.
The Jefferson trade obviously is a huge plus. Further ramifications, he got a 2021 second out of that as well. So it wasn't just, yeah, you got the draft pick and Jefferson, and yeah, it was, Billy Foley, and Zeke, but I think we've talked about this before as far as Roseville's concerned. The roster imbalance has not made a ton of sense. Obviously, parlayed that into winning in 2018. But if you're going to hold off and make the trade, and then you finally make the trade, setting up a running back and getting, who we think is in consideration for dynasty wide receiver one, that's good. So I mean, it's huge. I also think just some smaller, things that I think go into it. Adding Taysom Hill, I think he got a couple of big time starts. I mean, he specifically Roseville beat Minneapolis strictly based on Taysom Hill putting up like 40 plus. So got a couple wins from that. Adding Big Bob Tanyan, who was not very consistent, but did finish as tight end 6. So getting him for nothing. And then I really like the Jeff Wilson ad at the end of the season. He got a couple, he got a good game for whatever in his consolation bracket. But again, moving forward, I think that's good. So, and also, I mean, if we're looking at 4th round picks, I'll give him credit. Cephas, we weren't able to necessarily start him, but he did provide a little bit of something there, I guess. Not great, but as far as 2020 4th rounders are concerned, could have been worse than to take a flyer on him if you had to put him into the starting lineup. I agree. So we've talked about the Boyd trade kind of being a negative. Yeah, the CEH pick. I mean, I've talked about my warped hatred there for CEH. I just think Dobbins, Akers would have been better. Swift would have been better choices if you're going for a running back. At that spot, arguably, considering the situation he's in, obviously Herbert probably definitely the pick that should have been made there. But I just think the draft in general, as far as 2020. Now again, these are rookies, so they could all play out, but we're just judging this on 2020. Get absolutely nothing from Jalen Reagor. Get absolutely nothing from Denzel Mims. So, and some smaller things too. I mean, dropping Logan Thomas. You ended up getting Big Bob Tanyan, but Logan Thomas ended up being the tight end 3. Um, you know, there's a couple trades I don't think had any sort of, like the Pollard trade, I don't think had any sort of bearing on 2020 at all. I didn't particularly like the Pollard trade, but trading away Beasley probably hurt. I don't know that there was a playoff push that really could have happened, but um, yeah. So I think that's the case. I mean, most of that's outweighed by the Jefferson pick. I think, like you said, fleecing fleecing on Jefferson there more than makes up for some of these other things. And Taysom Hill longer term may end up being a starting quarterback. So getting him for free. So who knows?
Oh, and the other thing that won't show up on the stat board explicitly is that he managed to hang on to Baker Mayfield. And we could spend a lot of time talking about Baker Mayfield.
Yeah.
I have never really lost faith that he would be a superstar caliber quarterback. It certainly didn't look like that the last few years. And I tried very hard to get him to trade me Baker Mayfield on probably, I don't know, a handful of occasions this year and last year. And could be through some off-putting trade practices that he leverages, but he managed to hang on to him, and it looks like he may have turned the corner now in his current situation. So that again won't show up on any transactions. It was a non-transaction, but it was a good decision by him.
Right, and I mean, we'll kind of preface this all too by saying it's pretty hard to be overly competitive when you lose a player of CMC's caliber and only get to play him for 3 games this season. So if you're going to lose him, you might as well end up in a position to get a decent pick, I guess. Great. Any other pros cons you want to add to?
No, I led with him because I was thinking that he was in the doldrums, and it ended up being more positive than negative. So I feel like
we're just
just
trying to be.
I feel like we went from, oh man, look at this guy, he did a horrible job, to, oh well, I guess it wasn't that bad.
It'd been one of those situations where you start hearing yourself talk. You're like, I should be more positive.
Jeez.
It's a pandemic. No one wants to pile on.
Come on.
Yeah. Well,
all right. Nominate somebody.
I think the next one I'd like to talk about is we're gonna move just slightly west of there. We're gonna stay within the Lake Elmo Derby, but we're gonna go to Washington County.
Oh boy!
And talk about GM Joe Jenkins and his 2020 season. Now, year 2 for Joe in RASL. I think we can say overall, just kind of critiquing a lot of steps in the right direction as far as management was concerned, and in terms of just being a little more active, making a lot of trades, making a lot of ads. I think the biggest thing that we can put right up there at number 1 as far as positive is it's a 30-man roster, start to finish. Big win.
He did it. He did it.
Win. He did it. It's more than can be said for a couple of people in the league this year, which is very disappointing, and we will touch on that later. But I'm going to give you a couple quick pros, and I want you to add on anything that you have. Obviously, there's a flip side to this, but Antonio Gibson at number 19, that was a great pick. The negative being that he redshirted him and could not use him, but that pick turned out great at 19. I did like Smooch's ad. I really liked that a lot, not just for the nickname, but I did like that. I thought adding Marvin Jones, was a good ad. Getting him at the point he did. I know that was someone you were high on at the beginning of the season, me as well. I know you kind of cut bait there, and Joe got some great late end scores from him. Would have been nice if he maybe could have been pushing for playoffs, but that was good. Adding Alex Smith at the point he did and getting a starting quarterback out of him, who I know never scored more than 24 points as a starting quarterback, but still, picking him up, not paying anything. Adam Thielen, that trade As far as the long term, probably not looking great. But in the short term, getting wide receiver 16 for 2020, 13 touchdowns, really being able to solidify the receiving core. In the early part of the season, he's playing Thielen as a wide receiver 3, which is pretty nice. Before some trades, obviously, send a few guys out. And then I think we got to give him credit for getting David Montgomery when he did. I think he traded for him the week after, well, he didn't trade for him, but the trade was finalized after the bye, and that is when Montgomery popped. And that could not worked out better for him. So as far as the timing there, great. I didn't particularly like the trade as far as 2020 was concerned, just given Joe's roster, but I can't argue with what happened once he got Montgomery and the timing there. So those would be my pros.
Yeah, no, it was like you said, it was nice to see the activity this year, the full roster, the engagement, the trades. I getting Montgomery and Carson for this year was very good, and it ended up being a timing trade. So I know we're focused on 2020, but giving up DeAndre Hopkins it was the right move for 2020, as odd as that sounds, but
Yeah,
it's just tough to come to peace with giving away.
No, true. And I mean, I guess in his defense, maybe you look at what happened in the tail end of the season and you say, okay, maybe a corner's been turned and it's on the downside, and maybe Joe sold high. I don't think that's the case, but maybe.
No, I it's just the positives that you hit on, and then the very strange situation with his quarterbacks that he finds himself in. It's a fascinating set of circumstances.
Yeah, Warriors fans have got to be. They got to be. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens here. Joe and the rest of his fanship are going to be sitting high on the couch, getting ready to figure out what happens, because it's going. His whole outlook could go in any number of directions.
Yeah.
I will say I think there are a few, and we mentioned the D-Hop trade as a bit of a negative. Like I just think basically, when Gibson was sitting there, as far as making the trade for the RB, that could have probably solved that. I guess a big one for me would be, and this was not a huge, he didn't have a huge 2020 by any means. I just thought dropping KJ Hamler, who was his 3rd-round pick, to keep Tajay Sharp, who hasn't had a catch in now 3 seasons in the NFL, in the last 3 seasons, doesn't have an NFL catch. I thought was puzzling. And I know you thought that, he probably gave up on Daniel Jones a little too early, and that choice, I think you think is going to bear fruit for you.
No, I talked my own book a little bit. I was gonna not lead with that just because I'm a little bit partial to that, but it certainly, I think Daniel Jones is got all the makings of a top tier quarterback for a long time to come. And there is a premium on that. You might think I don't know that that's the case, but based on my trading history, but I do know that that's the case. So, I look at I don't know if this was all of it, but I ended up giving them Teddy and Gardner Minshew, who both, very potentially could not be quarterbacks in the very near future. Gardner was actually benched this season, so that doesn't bode well for his long-term prospects. And we took a little bit of a gamble. It turned out that there wasn't anything left in Le'Veon Bell, so he didn't really get much.
Wow, really? That was the trade?
Le'Veon Bell, Teddy, and Gardner Minshew for Tyler Johnson, Daniel Jones, and one what's his running back? Chicago used to be
Tariq going.
No. LeVar Miller.
Oh.
Who he should have cut, and I took him so that I could cut him for him.
So I had Daniel Jones trade written down, but I thought that was just when I was like higher on Daniel Jones like a couple months ago. I didn't realize that I wrote it down because he got Gardner Minshew, Teddy Bridgewater,
Le'Veon Bell
for Daniel Jones.
And Tyler Johnson.
Well, I guess it's a good thing that all those quarterbacks could be starting for him.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like
That's
he
huge.
legit, and it happened in 2020, where he was going from, hey, I've got no quarterbacks, I need to trade for two, who ended up not being quarterbacks,
Right.
to, hey, look at this, Jameis Winston stepping in, Carson Wentz is back, I've got Alex Smith is now playing, I've got five starting quarterbacks. Two, he very could likely have. Well, Carson Wentz is going to be the starting quarterback, but there's a lot hanging in his quarterback situation.
Wow. This is ominous. This went from like a feel good story to a dark, twisted nightmare. Wow. All right. Well, keep on keeping on, man. Goody gum. Oh boy. Well, where are we heading to next?
All right, why don't we go to my other nemesis?
Mm.
It's hard to even mention his
I like
name,
it.
but GM Carp in the St. Louis Park Centaurs.
I mean, look, the only thing I want to say offhand is like, this is not piling on. This is not piling on. This is just hard truths that we're spitting out here. So,
yes,
hit us up in the comments. Text
us up in the comments. Like and subscribe. Subscribe and like.
Just smash that subscribe button.
Just smash.
Go ahead.
Smash it.
I'll tell you what, go ahead and send a text in the thread. Let us all know where we're wrong. Send some questions. We'll read them on the air next time.
I just smashing it.
Bring that heat. Smash it.
So actually this was newsworthy, and this is maybe a good place to start for the Centaurs 2020 season, and that is Duke Johnson, who has been released by the Houston Texans. So he is no longer employed in the NFL. I guess maybe that didn't have a material impact on his season, but
I mean, it didn't, but it's always fun to talk about where Duke Johnson is. So we probably should have put that. That is right. We definitely should have put that.
Can we make a bullet point on the agenda for Duke Johnson?
Duke Johnson is going to be on more NFL teams now than RASL teams. It's always a race.
Say something nice about Carp. Trading for Aaron Rodgers was a good thing for him. I mean, he scored a lot of points, and he made his team almost make the playoffs.
But didn't he do that last year? Or was that
this year? Did he? I thought that was this year. I could be wrong. No, it was this year because he made the big proclamation that, hey, I'm pulling a Hatteberg. I'm giving up on draft picks.
Okay, that's right. I feel like that was a seismic trade that I should have known offhand was.
Yeah.
Seems like a big miss there. Yeah, I would say that's a positive.
Yeah, that was a positive. That was a really good positive. Yeah. And that's about it. I don't think he really had it. I was always in the Joe Burrow camp over Tua. I don't fault Carp for taking Tua. I don't know that he had a lot of choice there. And it still could.
So.
It still could turn out in his favor.
I'm not gonna bury Tua right now.
But for 2020, he wasn't all that great. No. He didn't, getting pulled in games that wasn't great. So that I don't look at that as a real positive for 2020, given some of the other rookies that we mentioned, and Herbert being a notable one. Again, not faulting Carp for that, but opportunity cost. And I absolutely cannot stress enough how dumb the trade was to give up Justin Jefferson. So that's probably where the conversation should start and stop. But
we can give him credit as a positive that he drafted Justin Jefferson at 12.
There you go. Good point. He should have taken him with the number 2 overall pick.
Right. or just kept a very valuable asset. You realize you have a jewel in your hand.
No, you don't do that.
Isn't that how the market works? Jewels, money given away.
I don't think so,
I don't think it does either.
but it's late. I don't know.
I'm not particularly sure. I have AJ Dillon pick written down, but he didn't really do anything until kind of the last week. I just thought maybe that showed something, so I'd maybe give him credit for the AJ Dillon pick, even though as far as 2020 is concerned, he really didn't do much.
So we're talking about 2020, so I won't point out the future.
Yeah.
But if I did point out the future, I would point out that
this sounds like you're just doing more of that Prince thing, just really working those lines.
we're not gonna talk about the
We're not
future.
Gonna talk about the future.
But there's a good chance that Aaron Jones is not gonna be back in Green Bay. And we saw some stuff in 2020. There we go, tying it to 2020 from AJ Dillon that could be pretty good. Which, if I can be Mr. Spin Zone, means you really didn't need Zeke. And wouldn't it be nice to have the RB1 for the Packers for the 2021 season, who is a physical freak?
Yeah.
The new Quadzilla. I don't know if he's taken up Saquon's title as Quadzilla, but he certainly is in the conversation.
It's right there.
He's going to be a touchdown monster. Yeah. And so what's he going to do? He's got Kareem Hunt. He's got Chubb. He's not going to play Zeke. He's going to play Dillon. If he wants to do this, I don't play the running backs from the same team thing. Got to be nice to have another superstar wide receiver, but what are you going to do?
I mean,
he traded for Edelman too. And that's a head scratcher.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can couch a lot of this, and we didn't make the playoffs after making multiple win now trades. Like, if you're making a bunch of win now trades and you don't even make the playoffs, that's a big mark on the old resume. And I know he had some tough luck. If he was playing somebody else's schedule, he would have made the playoffs. Or if Minneapolis had knocked out Lake Elmo last week, he would have made it. Would have been in the tournament. So I get that. So I get he's right on the doorstep. But ultimately, you make all these win now trades, you don't even make the playoffs. You don't even get a chance at Trofer. I mean, it's tough. Yeah, the Zeke.
Tough pill to swallow.
The Zeke trade was terrible. Trading Jefferson away. You forgot to mention maybe the key error in this entire season, like the one upon which that entire temple may crumble, and that is the Marcus Mariota trade.
Oh my God, yes.
Giving you back the Mac machine, Marcus Mariota, for
a poo-poo platter. For a poo-poo platter. He got duped by the old poo-poo platter. Who falls for that in 2020?
I mean, he's a hungry guy, I guess. I don't know. He just wanted something. He needs some calories or something. But yeah, that was a rough one.
He put up 45 points or something, 48 points in 1 week.
He could be a starter.
He could
be a starter. In 2020, I mean, the Easton trade, trading a fourth in 2022 to pulse a 25th to draft Jacob Eason, who now doesn't look like he's going to get a shot as a starter. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. I just think this is funny. It gets lost, and again, this is not piling on. This is Carp. This is your 2020. There's just a lot of bad things that happened. I know you had a bad run of it, but like, you didn't start it off great by blowing all of your fab on Devine Azigbo, Lynn Bowden Jr., and Jalen Samuels, and basically having no fab money, and then desperately needing quarterbacks, and then trading for fab money. I think that was a bad start to the season. You got the Aaron Rodgers trade, and then it was like, oh crap, like, this is a legit contender. He could be pressing for titles, and then that good juju was gone in no time. But yeah, it was a tough go of it for Carp in 2020. So at least he got to keep Journeyman Genie. So I guess there's some win there. Yeah, it's smarts. Oh, that's smarts.
Let's go 2021.
We've talked about 2/3 of the triumvirate in Lake Elmo. So why don't we touch on the third, and we'll head to Lake Elmo proper and discuss the Lumberjacks GM, that is GM Kyle Trainer. And this is just gonna be a nice kind of transition from down in the doldrums, just being super negative. Can't even find a piece of bread for the compliment sandwich we were trying to give Carter. To then transition into being able to first point out that I think we've talked about this before, the simple fact that Kyle managed to put together a competent, competitive roster with all of the injury issues that he had, make the playoffs. Losing Joe Burrow after, I believe it was 8 weeks or 6 weeks, 7 weeks, something like that. Having the injuries that he had at other key positions throughout the season. So I think that alone is a positive for him. And you couple that with the second that he managed to secure for Todd Gurley, the corpse of Todd Gurley. I mean that's a huge get. I don't understand. I mean, I know Dave was maybe rolling the dice on a new situation, but kudos to Kyle for that. And then also the 3-card Monty game that he had, where he just kept acquiring multiple 4th-round picks for trading the same 5th-round pick. I'd like to know how to do that. And I know you have your doubts about it, but I thought Carr, Samuel, and a second for Hollywood was a pretty good haul. So yeah, I think those would be the pros. Any pros you have to add?
Yeah, I would just kind of reiterate, he was dealt a lot of blows here. He had to overcome a lot this year. And specifically to that trade that you're referencing, I think the one, I'm very familiar, obviously, with the ins and outs of all those players, and I think the one that I don't worry so much about Derek Carr, because I think he hit his ceiling, and his ceiling is milk toast. It's nothing. You're not going to start him unless you have to start him.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't really worry too much about that piece of it, and I'm sure that wasn't really an attractive selling part of that trade anyway. But Curtis Samuel, I had traded for him from Mulvey in his rookie season, and I was or maybe it was in his second year. I forget the exact timing on it, but I was very high on him. And it was more of I envisioned kind of the quick hitting routes, not necessarily a gadget player that was going to be running the ball.
Right.
And I thought this was going to be the year he was going to be in a contract year. He was going to be a free agent. And I thought for the first time he was going to either have a quarterback throwing to him, or he was going to be the bona fide number 2. And they traded for Bobby Anderson, and that totally put a monkey wrench in all that. And then come to find out, Teddy has not changed. He's not an impressive quarterback.
Right.
And so I think I temporarily glossed over the fact that he's too much of a gadget player in a bad opportunity, and forgot that he was going to be a free agent. And for whatever reason, in the second half of the season, they started using him more like a vertical receiver, running routes and hitting him. Right. And all of a sudden now you see what he potentially could be in the right situation. And that is where I think that trade could end up hurting, is that he could end up in a good situation and end up being, because I think in the second half of the season, he was the top 10 receiver.
Yeah, I mean, he had that 3-week stretch where he had over 30 points for 3 consecutive weeks.
Yeah. So I think that one could hurt. That was a really nice move on his part.
Mhm.
He didn't have to work hard for that. I will point
Right.
out. I did most of the heavy lifting for him there, but that
Yeah.
was good on him.
Yeah, I buried the lead by not mentioning that obviously he lost Dak Prescott after 5 weeks. So losing QB, who he's playing
He
as
was
QB
one at
one.
the time, right?
Yeah, yep. He still was a top 5 quarterback 3 weeks later because of how many points he had scored.
Yeah.
And I know, he had one of the lowest points against. He only scored the seventh most points or sixth most points in the entire league. Uh, or no, seventh most points in the entire league, and didn't have many against him. So he had a relatively easy schedule, but still losing your QB1 and your QB2, and getting dinged up at other positions throughout. I think that's something that has to be mentioned. I do think, and he would have a much stronger case if it wasn't for the automatic removal from consideration for the fact that he was under the roster minimum or under the roster maximum for 2/3 of the season.
The very official automatic disqualifier.
Yeah, I mean, that's egregious. It's embarrassing.
Well, then we need to change the rules to allow for 5-6 defenses.
I guess so, yeah. And that overwhelms the. I mean, I get you're getting just going for long-term value at the Jordan Love pick, but obviously getting nothing there. Considering his running back issues, dropping Wayne Gallman when he did, who then became a viable player on the back half of the season. Smaller misses, but obviously, like I said, the roster maximum, the big issue there. But additional kudos for keeping the team afloat, making the playoffs, losing the players that he did at the important position. Of course, having a little bit of depth there and making that trade with you to solidify the quarterbacks in the back end definitely helped. What are we moving to next? Do it. Put yourself in the chair. Do it.
GM Hatteberg?
Do it.
I don't want to be the primary on myself, so
That's tacky.
It is tacky. Why don't we go with? I'm gonna go down to the southeast and do the Geneva Gigolos.
Which of
What a
course means
2020!
Old Spanish ship.
I believe that's correct. What a 2020!
Would you call
Hard
it
to
a roller coaster?
hard to imagine that you land Deshaun Watson. You already have Patrick Mahomes. You land Deshaun Watson and Derrick Henry, and you don't win it all. And you started the season with Saquon Barkley.
Mm.
I think, and you can remind me if this is correct, but I think most people assumed he was going to win this year.
That's correct. He was,
and that was largely driven by 2020 moves. So he did a nice job being on the receiving end of a favorable trade. But the receiver thing, and that we talked about it earlier when we were talking about DK Metcalf. So to have DK Metcalf starting off the season the way he did, and Tyler Lockett, who there's a target share issue there, having two on the same team, but it looked like receiver was not going to be a problem for him, and his players just petered out throughout the season. Ruggs was a miss. And I always kind of cringe at writing off a wide receiver in year one because we get used to like the Justin Jefferson or the OBJs. And so it can happen.
Yeah. I mean, those are by far the exception to the rule. Most rookie receivers, the number of rookie receivers that end up as wide receiver ones, in terms of like top 10 or 12 seasons is very minimal.
Yeah. And having Chris Godwin be diluted away, it was just kind of a tough year for him. And I'm trying to think what other transactions. Van Jefferson was we'll see what happens there. That didn't help this year.
Yeah, the Ruggs and the Van Jefferson picks were, I don't think we're good, especially considering who else was there. He had some other options at both of those positions. I get Ruggs, at that point you're taking value with the draft capital, but especially for someone that's been so on the mark with wide receivers throughout his career in terms of being able to identify talent there and being such a good drafter at that position. It was just shocking to me that he was so just kind of so bad at it this year, for lack of a better phrase. Just kind of surprising. Um, and he was picked to finish second. Hopkins actually was the overall predicted champ, but Geneva was right below him. So I agree. I mean, obviously, I thought Cooks and Robbie for Boyd. We talked about that when we were talking about Penton's case. I think that's a pro for Joel, considering, like I said, he got a top 10 and a top 20 wide receiver for Boyd, who was barely top 30, and then just accepting the Henry and the Watson trade. By default, there becomes a winner. We're in another situation though, where a strong case is thrown out the window. And is lit on fire on the ground because he was under the roster maximum for 50% of the season. So not quite as long as his asleep at the wheel GM partner in Lake Elmo, but over half the season was under the roster maximum. So not in consideration for me. That's just dereliction of duty as far as I'm concerned. I also would point out that I thought that DJ Moore trade, he got absolutely nothing for 2020. DJ Moore could have, he didn't necessarily, he could have gotten a slightly better version of Robbie Anderson by just keeping DJ Moore. But, you got James White, who is not playable at any point, Jay Sternberger, not playable at any point, and Anthony Miller, not playable at any point. So he got absolutely nothing as far as 2020 is concerned. He does have the 2022 first, so there's some value there, obviously, but that would be another, I think, negative for Joel's resume as far as executive of the year.
No, I was going to point out the DJ Moore thing too, because he ended up being pretty solid on the year.
Yeah, and I don't point that out to pile on because I'm the GM that actually got DJ Moore. I just mean he could not have played a single player that he got started them at any point during the season. So so I think we are going to move to Maple Grove. We're going to put GM Hatteberg in the hot seat. Let's start out with trying to sift through the long line of pros in terms of. I'm going to put drafting Cam Akers as the number one pro. That was a great choice. There's some other positions that could have gone, and I thought that was 100% the right choice to make there. So I thought that was a huge get. And then he was kind of up and down, but I do think you should give some credit for Nelson Aguilar. I thought adding Nelson Aguilar after I dropped him twice deemed him unworthy on 2 separate occasions. But I do think that you picking him up, I think you should get some credit for that. So, those would be my pros. Do you have any other pros you feel like from this season that you'd like to add?
I kind of think it was a really good season.
Mm-hmm.
So buckle up. No.
Yeah.
I like I said, it was a transition year, so I'm not going to focus on too much. But if we are going to focus on 2020, there's probably no point in belaboring it. But
and you mentioned this at the front. You basically were punting on 2020. So this is no surprise. We'll keep this relatively light. I don't want to. I mean, this feels like punching down a little bit, but in terms of cons for 2020, the Watson and the Henry trade, obviously that was not a trade made for you to score a ton in 2020. Akers showing up at the end, I think, helped, but that's definitely a con. The first for Teddy. If there's one person I dislike more in the NFL than CH, it may be Teddy Bridgewater. So I'm just not going to go down that road. But my God, first for Teddy. Wow. Mark Andrews for Gardner Minshew, straight up. Interesting. And a couple other drops, but I feel like at this point it's just kind of backing the car over after over the raccoon after it's already been hit. We'll just see if there's anything else you wanted to maybe add on to that.
No, I mean, I feel bad about Curtis Samuel, as I already mentioned, but
Yeah, I could just put. I think I could have just put like valuation of value, just like just as a con maybe for 2020.
all right.
I mean,
Well,
look, I'm just saying, it's not. This is 2020 was not the year you were planning for, so that's fine. This is all
no,
about 2021 and moving forward.
yeah,
I can feel
2020
you.
was. I'm not going to win GM of the year for 2020,
That's fair.
but you may look back in hindsight and say we should have at least considered him.
Interesting. Well, it could be one of the many regrets we have about 2020.
Regrets.
Not giving you your proper due.
Yep, this could be a 2017 situation.
It could be right there. Well, I think we'll kind of keep this before it gets to be too combative. I can sense hostility
Yeah.
building. So why don't you move us on to the next GM?
All right. Well, why don't we go with the Minneapolis Mercenaries?
Oh man, duel it right back.
Mm-hmm.
Little tete-a-tete, little volley.
Well, we already hit on one of the big positives, which was DJ Moore. It was a phenomenal trade. I partially biased there because he fits the bill of wide receivers that I'm looking for. That I think translate well for the current game and the game to come. So, I didn't realize all the pieces that went in there. So, that was the quintessential poo-poo platter and the pick. So I don't know if you can call it that because you throw the pick in there, but
yeah, I mean, the 2020 second first. I mean, I'll put it out there as part of my. I don't have any picks to trade away anymore in it, but I think the 2022 draft is absolute garbage. It may be like on par with I think 2013 as far as like lack of high end skill talent. I've already traded away my first and my second, so I'm not too concerned. But those could still be decent picks. In which case, there's a whole something there. But yeah, I feel great about it, and I could do a whole podcast about DJ Moore and how much I think he's gonna totally go off. But I digress.
I think the story for GMZ.
Whoa. I've never said it like that before.
Gosh, you could change your logo to like a car company type logo. Wow, my head hurts now.
That's just not, and that's not just from all the analysis going
on. It's not. Before I get into what I think the story for you in 2020 was, the biggest negative, and it's an ongoing issue for you, and I think you owe it to your fans to explain why Darius Geis is still on your squad. And if you could talk a little bit about the culture and the ethics in the organization formerly known as Minneapolis.
I mean, I think the thing about it is it's just a strong culture, and we're about second chances. I've read a lot about Urban Meyer, and I just really try to replicate my life around Urban Meyer and how he would handle things. And that's really just kind of like the life model for me. So, as a franchise, we want to make sure that we're providing all of the opportunities and second chances and third chances. And who are we to say? And that's, I guess, really what it boils down to for me is just, doing what Urban would do, looking at everything and saying, I don't see it. Why don't you hang around for a while and we'll just see. We'll just see what happens. And I think that's the way we approach things in Minneapolis. We're about extending the hand. We're not about taking, the bread out of someone's mouth. That's the thing. I know a lot of people don't get it.
Well, at no point did you come close to answering that question, and we are now all dumber for having listened to you.
I won't lie.
I would like you to turn in your St. Thomas shorts.
I'll tape over the class act, and I'll make sure the monocle doesn't show anymore. Part of that is I am not willing to admit full defeat on my last second pivot from selecting Lamar Jackson because of how bad he played in that exhibition game, the preseason game right before the draft at your house. And I let it get to me. And it drives me nuts. I had him as the number 2 quarterback behind Mayfield. And I was all set to draft him. Kyle traded ahead of me to draft Sam Darnold, which I had it wasn't even the stratosphere of what I would possibly do. And I just sat there and kept thinking about Lamar Jackson and how I had him there. And then now I'm going to go with a running back, and there weren't any good running backs, and there's Darius Geis, and being like, yeah, he's hurt, but he'll be fine. Yeah, and that's like the last vestige of me not believing in Lamar. So I think part of it is like keeping him to remind myself of the mistake that I made.
No, that doesn't make sense. But it is a good jumping off point to what I think the positive was, which was one of the most impressive drafts that I can recall in a very long time. And you got immediate results. So we don't even have to say like this is positioning you well down the road. This did you well in 2020. And I think we start with we already hit on Jonathan Taylor.
Right.
So he finishes as what, the number 4 or 5 running back, you said?
Running back 4. Yeah, running back 4 for the year.
So incredible. What a pick. Yeah. No doubter at that. But you also got CeeDee Lamb. And
felt great.
And despite losing the number 1 quarterback at the time and having Ben DiNucci throwing to him and some other corpses, he still ended up with like a really solid year and some freakishly impressive touchdown catches. And he sure looks like he is not only producing, but on track to be one of those elite wide receivers.
Yeah, I mean, he finished wide receiver 22 when you factor in Andy Dalton, Ben DiNucci, and Garrett Gilbert. That's great. He was the second highest scoring rookie wide receiver, obviously after Justin Jefferson. And the thing for me was the first 5 weeks with Dak, he averaged 28.2 per game, which would put him on par. And granted, obviously you can't necessarily extrapolate that all the way out, but 28.4 would be right behind, would be wide receiver 5 or wide receiver 6 for the season. So, yeah, I feel pretty good about that. The draft worked out really well as far as 2020, being able to just like plug in Taylor and Lamb was a great wide receiver 3 for me early, and even later still was viable. So that helped out. I got some spurts from, as far as 2020 production, some spurts from Pittman and Chenault as well. So yeah, that worked out really well.
You got stats in 2020 from Pittman, who was he hurt?
He was hurt for 3 weeks.
So he missed a bit, but he scored some points, and now he figures to be probably target number 1, barring any off-season moves for Wentz.
Even if Hilton comes back, that's not going to make a difference there.
No, Pittman will usurp Hilton for the number 1 targets. And I think Chenault is going to be the number 1 for Trevor Lawrence. I don't think it's going to be Chark.
Yeah.
I think he's got that skill set. I think he's got that style. We'll see what happens with some of the other moves they make. But you're looking at historically good draft that had very good 2020 performance, abnormally good 2020 performance.
Right.
And not that we talk about the future because we don't, but my God.
Yeah. I'm excited about that. I'm excited about that. I'm excited about having 3 picks in the top 6 in a loaded draft in 2021. So the turnaround should help. I do think the obviously, trading away. I think part of that, the good stuff. I think that the draft was obviously the biggest pro. The negatives would be, Moore did do well, finishes wide receiver 16. I was kind of making that trade, expecting him to be a top 10 wide receiver. So for me, it was a bit of a disappointment that he didn't quite pop. Still not like a bad loss there, but I thought I was going to get more from Christian Kirk this year. I was kind of looking at 2021 as the year where it would really pay off for that draft pick, but playable for another 3-week stretch, but that was about it. Dropping Cole Beasley, before the season, looking at it and saying, okay, Beasley's going to be like a PPR guy, but what does that really mean? I don't want a guy that's going to average 15 points per game. I need a little bit more there. And obviously that ended up being an issue for me with kind of wide receiver 3 and all the quarterback issues I was having with Chark and Lamb and all of that. That was a bad drop. So was dropping Aguilar twice, not keeping Aguilar. I think that would be another negative as well. So, and then just for me, not drafting James Robinson in the 5th round, taking Troutman, which he could be a decent tight end, but that hurt.
I think Cook's gone. It'll depend on if Breeze actually retires, which I think he's going to, but he hasn't yet.
Yeah.
And who they get at quarterback, but yeah, Troutman was the class of the tight end. It wasn't deep by any means, but
no, it was basically Troutman and Bryant, and I think Albert O.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as drafting was considered, Komet was the top, but I think as far as looking at it from fantasy perspective, that's kind of who you'd have. So yeah, I think it was a good draft, but there's a lot of things on the fringe that I think didn't quite work out for me. So I think that keeps me out of the top tier. So moving into that, I would say the next choice will be in Dubiner, keeping it in the Northwest, talking about Alec Danielson. So the pros for him would be trading Marlon Mack to move up for J.K. Dobbins. So obviously trading a guy that got hurt before the season even started, or right when the season started, for getting J.K. was great. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Logan Thomas, adding Logan Thomas after RASL dropped him, and getting the tight end 3 was a great move. I thought the Darnell Mooney bid was a nice little fringe thing. He is a kind of on the edges kind of wide receiver. Adding Jacoby Myers, again, adding him for free. Getting the number 1 kicker, Young Waiku. Not a huge difference, but this year with the number 1 kicker, he was a little bit better than most. And he got them the Colts and Dolphins defenses as ads, which Koo and the Dolphins and the Colts were big factors for him in terms of actually winning the division, getting that bye, and then making it to the semifinals. So I thought those were huge. And in the short term, he got the 2 decent weeks from Fulgham. He outbid everyone for Fulgham. Got a couple of good weeks from him that I think gave him 1 start, if not 2, throughout that period. So that was the pros I had. Anything you had to add?
Tied to your pros, I will point out that I dropped Young Ho and the Colts D to allow him to pick them up. So,
so we got a couple more slices of that top end turkey to put in that con sandwich for you, huh?
Yeah.
You didn't have to point that out. You could have not told me that you made more mistakes.
That's all right. I believe in transparency.
Do you go get your GIMP mask or something? Like being whipped?
Nah, it's fine. Yeah. The Jacoby Myers thing was big. And I like Mooney too. I think there's some good stuff there. he had the Kittle injury, nothing he could do there. Yeah, I guess to just add a little bit more color on a rather notable trade, we'll see the J.K. Dobbins thing. So he needed a tight end, and we had been in trade discussions about Gogurt and putting him together, and kind of tied to with what I said earlier. I needed to pivot, and there were some concerns on Josh Jacobs. I already had written off Juju, although I don't think everybody had, and Gogurt was potentially not going to be a thing. He already had, I think he already had Logan Thomas when we eventually made the trade.
He did.
So we'll see what happens, with Hurts in Philadelphia, but I think there was a stretch there after I made the trade where Gogurt produced at a high level, but at the same time he had Thomas, so he didn't end up needing it or using it, I don't think. And I don't think Juju did. He might have had one game where he was all right, but otherwise he didn't really do anything. And in the process, he gave up J.K. Dobbins, and I think J.K. Dobbins, that's going to be a negative for him, because I think as quickly as next year, if you look at the trade as just running back up against running back, I don't think Josh Jacobs is going to be to the same level that Dobbins will be.
Yeah, I mean, long term, long term, I don't think so. I think he's getting good cumulative value, but I did have for the cons for the Alman, I did have 2020 returns on the Dobbins trade. He made that trade. He made that trade in week 11, I think. And from week 11 on, basically, Juju, Josh Jacobs, and Gogurt all pretty much sucked. Jacobs failed to score over 25 in any of those weeks. Gogurt, I don't think he even hit 18 at any point, and Juju had one good week from then on. So, just again, 2020 returns on that trade were not good. I think just looking at 2020, Judy over Lamb, not great long term. That could obviously change. And then multiple fourth round picks in 2021 and 2022 to move up and draft. Donovan Peoples-Jones, who showed some things toward the end of the year, and Antonio Gandy Golden, I believe, who I don't think had any snaps, and I don't know. So again, we're just kind of is a pretty airtight case. I think Allman had the best waiver work of anyone on the waiver wire. I think obviously he built the most to his team from there. I think he, was a very, very real finalist for this, and I think was certainly in the mix. So again, just trying to poke some holes in a little bit of the case, but I think this is a really great job overall. Ran into a buzzsaw, obviously in the playoffs. That was a rough beat for the L-man to take that L against Hopkins, but yeah, he set himself up for success. Looking to defend the title. So I think overall he had a very strong resume for Executive of the Year. But ultimately, the winner, the only one we have not touched on so far, is Dan Cobian, who is the 2020 RASL Executive of the Year. Why don't you go ahead and
we skipped our champ, Hopkins.
Oh, whoops. We did.
Yeah. Why don't we hit Hopkins first?
Yeah, and you know what? I think that's an interesting segue into talking about Hopkins, because I think what you and I will both show here, and again, this is, we're pointing out, he's got Trofer. Trofer Grace is in Hopkins. But I think that omission might have actually been pointing out the fact that we think that GM Steinhaus actually won this kind of in spite of the moves that he made this year. I think might be safe to say. We don't want to be, again, we're not trying to be harsh. You got Trofer, so you did it. But I don't think a lot of the moves that you made during the season um, probably lined you up for that. So my apologies for skipping. But why don't you lay out the pro case for our champ? Point that out. Trofer Grace back in Hopkins, ending the drought.
Yeah. I think he had another good draft with a couple rookies that immediately contributed.
Right.
And I think again, this is going to be a little bit of talking my own book, but I made several hard attempts at Jalen Hurts before he was a player, thinking that he might be the eventual answer in Philadelphia. And to his credit, even with lopsided offers that I make, he refused. And we'll see how it plays out. But I think Hurts ended up being QB1, at least the QB1. And although he didn't play him that week, did he?
No, he did not. He did not. That was in the tail end in the playoffs. But yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so that was a great draft pick, and good resilience and discipline to not give in to other offers to move him. But and we already talked about having Kelsey and adding. You knocked me for it, but adding Andrews didn't really make a lot of sense, and that's kind of the theme too. Is he has an absurd treasure trove of wide receiver talent that probably should have been parlayed into more balance.
Right.
That would have made his victory pursuit almost a guaranteed venture. But he didn't, and it worked out. So what are you going to say? But
yeah, and I think that's one of the things you kind of see is the course that we tend to have here is it's that there's these opportunities to really strengthen the roster that everybody thought was going to win the title this year, much as we have for numerous seasons, and then almost making moves that ran counter to what was needed. And that's to your point. I mean, getting Mark Andrews for Gardner Minshew just straight up is great. Like you're trading away someone who wasn't even a starting quarterback, for one of the 4 best tight ends in the league. But to your point about like having that, where you have Kelsey, you're never not going to play Kelsey. You have 1 week where he's on bye. That's not worth having the other guy because it's lost value. I actually, and behind the curtain a little bit, I made a play for Andrews because I had no tight end, and I'm like, well, he's not going to play Andrews, so why wouldn't he? And he told me and I was basically told that there was no deal to be made because he was too expensive. That doesn't make sense for someone that's trying to win a title to have two of the top 4, unless maybe you're playing defense there, but with a very clear, and this is one of the things I think that comes up is having a clear Achilles heel that has basically kept you from winning the title 3 times, 4 times when you should have. Having that running back depth. You mentioned the great draft, and there are a lot of pros to the resume here. I think Claypool at 27, obviously for 2020, that's phenomenal. Ayuk at 18, especially in the tail half of the year, was great. So those 2 specifically for 2020 was fantastic. Obviously drafting Hurts and having him, not only playing him once, but having him there was, that would have single-handedly won those 2 weeks. And then 2 years ago, trading a 3rd rounder to me for Julian Edelman, and then in 2020 trading Julian Edelman to Carp for a 3rd rounder. That alone should probably put him in contention. So those are up there for me. And you mentioned a couple, and I would just say, I think we talked about it earlier, the Todd Gurley trade. A 2nd round pick for Todd Gurley was pretty rough. I wasn't quite sure when you have no running back depth, and that's what's always killed you in the playoffs. been trading James Conner for Drew Brees and Julio. Like Drew Brees, who we know is retiring. I actually thought getting Julio for James Conner was good. What's your point? I just don't know what getting another wide receiver does. Between wide receivers and draft picks, we could have two 30-man rosters in Hopkins, but those were sketchy. And I know we both are big Scary Terry fans, so the Mclaren trade, I know, it was a shot to our hearts collectively on that. And I just thought, not acquiring a better running back too, or drafting a running back like early in the season, knowing that you got Lamar, you got Brady, you've got the receivers that you do, you've got Travis Kelce. It's just like you just make a trade, get a really good running back, and just murder people from week 1 on, or use your number 10 draft pick and get one of the running backs there. And instead, T Higgins, who was good, but I just think could have had Swift there, could have had another running back. So just some things there that I just didn't think gave him the best opportunity. I think it could have been a much clearer path to Trofer this year with better running backs and just some better 2020 management. But ultimately, didn't matter. He got there. He knew how to get there. The champ.
All hail the champ.
That's right.
Bend the knee.
Bend it. Well, who does that leave us with then? I might have already spoiled the surprise, but
spoiler alert: Whitaker, Wendigo.
That's how it's pronounced. It's French. So
Dan Gobian.
Yeah, he's the 2020 Executive of the Year. I think there's basically two reasons why this happened, and you can clearly lay those out for us.
Are you testing me right now?
I mean, I am. I thought it was pretty straightforward.
It is.
Frank Gore.
No, it's his rookies. Justin Herbert, Hair Bear, who he was audibly mocked and ridiculed for drafting. I think he was aware of that, and we've certainly told him about it since then. Yeah. Because we had him on video, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess he got the last laugh there. And it didn't take long. I think in our group text, I think we were second Air Bear game into it, and I'm like, oh crap, what did we do? Watch this guy throw. He's got a howitzer. He's accurate. He's poised. This is a problem.
Yeah.
So hell of a job drafting there. And, he's got a track record with quarterbacks. So I believe it is through skill that he made that decision. At the time, it felt like he was forced into that pick just because of other players going ahead of him. But for whatever, I guess whatever the thought process was there, doesn't really matter. He landed hands down the best quarterback and the best pick of the draft. And that was a big part of him being in the title game. And then if you can say more about.
No, I just want to mention the direct quote from Dan Boy after he drafted Herbert, and we all mercilessly made fun of him, was "Fuck you assholes for not drafting him. This is Paxton Lynch 2.0."
Yep. Okay, so it wasn't skill.
and then immediately texted everyone and said, would anyone like to trade for Justin Herbert? And we all responded back with buyer's remorse. I would have traded him before I finished typing his last name into the draft box. Judy is who I actually wanted.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh man. Okay.
Anyway.
So again, regardless of how he got there, he landed the number one.
He landed the number one
pick, and then James Robinson.
Yeah. He had to pay a pretty penny for, to get him. James Robinson had 7 bids preseason.
Yeah, but he landed them.
Yeah, and those are definitely the two biggest. I like the Scary Terry trade for 2020. I really like it moving forward, but I think it was good for 2020. And then obviously D Hop, I think, helped solidify him. Granted, he kind of petered a little bit towards the tail end, but the acquiring D Hop helped him take the division title, get the bye, make it to the semis, or make it all the way to the title game. So Between the Diop trade, the Herbert pick, the Robinson pickup, and then scary Terry trade on sprinkle that on the backside. That offset what I think are some minor negatives for him. Taking Darrington Evans at 26, which is that's a tough one. Although really there couldn't be a more Dan Boy pick than Darrington Evans. Like just the type of running back he is, the name. It's just very Dan Boy. And then obviously I think a bit of a con for him is making the trade with Montgomery and then watching Montgomery just murder. And and then have Dan Boy go into the title game into the playoffs without James Robinson, knowing that Montgomery could have maybe offset some of that. I don't think it would have made a difference for him in the championship game, considering he got torn limb from limb by the monster that is Hopkins, but certainly would have made it a little more competitive. So there it is.
He did a nice job.
Absolutely.
He sucks, but he did a nice job.
Yeah. So ultimately I guess we got a couple pats on the back, a fair amount of wagging of the fingers at various GMs here. So it'll wrap up all the RASL awards. Just to recap, 2020 RASL awards: Comeback Player of the Year, Cam Newton; quarterback, Minneapolis Mercenaries; Coach of the Year, John Fisher, St. Louis Park Centaurs; Breakout Player, DK Metcalf; wide receiver, Geneva Gigolos; Rookie of the Year, Justin Herbert; quarterback, Whitaker Wendigo; RASL MVP, Travis Kelce; tight end, Hopkins Harpooners; and the RASL Executive of the Year, GM Dan Kobian. So before we call it here, Ryan, I do have a couple quick questions for you. Being another connoisseur of cinema, obviously the highest echelon of cinema is MacGruber. So what I want to do is, someone that just knows it in and out and what really makes it tick. I would like you to let us know what your favorite minor detail is about MacGruber. Being a Groob head, being a Groovy, what's something that's below the radar for the regular viewer and that you really enjoy about that film, the experience?
Oh, good question. Well, so the first thing I think about almost always when I think of MacGruber, and I'm certainly not saying that nobody else thinks about this angle at all either, but I don't think it's like the low hanging fruit, so to speak. Is KFBR 392. That was my fantasy baseball name for at least 2 years after that. And I still, when I think of MacGruber, I think of KFBR 392. It's a kind of a subtle running angle of the movie that doesn't get a lot, but I find it endlessly entertaining. And I love that it speaks to the character of who he is and how he won't let things go. And it also makes me think of his detachable radio, which is also a very fascinating element.
Oh man, and it just makes me think of the entire club scene right now. I mean, whether I can just go. Although the thing that popped into my head when I'm talking about that is Vicky St. Elmo. After she comes, and I'm 3. Well, 3 makes a team. And they turn around like, Vicky, what about your singing career? It can wait. I mean, I know that's like just an outward joke, but and then Powers Booth staring at her and just going, that really did it for me.
The late Powers Booth.
That would be mine. So I think that's a good choice. I do like the KFBR 392. Obviously, it's a bit in there. I like the callback to it when Piper finds the notebook with him pooping on the car or pooping in the mouth. That's great stuff. Well, the last question I'm going to ask you is: so you've now, I mean, obviously you're a man of many rivals. You have, upped your rivalry with Carp by having the Journeyman Genie, which I would love to see all the other rivalries develop a trophy. Naturally, none of them will, but that'd be great. But now you've turned the heat up on your showdown with John Penton in Roseville, Stillwater, through a long-term bet. So what I want to ask you right now is, who would you rather lose to, Carp or Penton?
Oh, I'd much rather lose to Penton. Yeah, I like talking shit with Penton. He's a good jelly to my peanut butter. It's a natural, ridiculous, over the top ongoing feud that we have. That I think we both get a lot out of and enjoy. We also both like the action. We like the heat.
A lot of jollies.
So putting some monetary units on this wager. I also think it's going to be quite easy for me to win because he is a train wreck of a GM. So that part's fun. But with all of my being and my essence and who I am, I despise Jonathan Fisher, aka Carp, and his ridiculously, pathetically run franchise, the Centaurs. And I am a little on edge because I had to relinquish the genie. I will point out, I'm probably calling on the dogs here, but I mercilessly took pictures with that and sent it to him on the regular. And he has shown restraint so far, at least with direct communication. Yeah, I don't doubt he's the type of person that talks shit about somebody behind their back and has a good game. I kind of like to look my victims in the eye when I'm bodying them. But yeah, I got crushed this year by the Centaurs, and I can't fathom a future where that continues to happen. It won't happen.
You won't let it.
We're taking it back. 2021. Journeyman Genie.
That's what
Maple Grove.
There's no you can't put a price on your pride.
No. The money means very little.
It's just paper.
It is. That's right.
Indeed. I think that's the right highlight to go out on. So, Brian, thanks again for joining. Look forward to our next episode. We'll be coming.
Does that start in 20 minutes?
Yeah. Oh, weeks down the line, we'll have new shirts on.
Well,
it'll be great. I mean, I probably won't either.
COVID.
I rotate through like 4 shirts and 2 pairs of pants. So I do laundry every 2 days. So there's really no need to wear more than that. Who even
I haven't worn pants
anyway?
or shoes almost a year.
I can get used to aspects of COVID.
Yeah.
That being the clothing lifestyle, I guess. Not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we really just laid it on everyone here. We just keep getting better. We just keep getting better. Keep chopping wood. I think everyone's really impressed. So, Harrison, what do you think?
Hachi Machi, who's taking on Grand Ranch?